Welcome to Origin Story, where we discuss the lives and careers of underrepresented groups and professional fields. Today, I have Michelle Zaman with me of the Scholarship Bay, which is a organization founded to level the higher education playing field and to help students from underrepresented communities afford to go to college through scholarships. That's a basic mission statement. So with that, just passing it over to Michelle here. Michelle, tell us a little bit about your professional story and how you got to be where you're at right now. We can maybe start with your family, your personal life, and build into that.
Sure, sounds good. Well, my name is Michelle Zaman, and I come from an immigrant background. My mom's from Guyana and my dad's from Pakistan. And being a child of first generation immigrants, where like the typical immigrant story of like coming to America and having these expectations on your kids to fulfill that education and American dream, that's basically been, my life. I was the first one in my family to go to college, first one to graduate high school. So I think that for me, like it's just been a lot of like firsts for a lot of things. And I started when I first started applying for college, it was really difficult just because like I didn't have like that blueprint or like that like straight pathway I feel like that other students may have, you know what I mean? I didn't know FAFSA, I didn't know about any of that stuff. And I also didn't realize like how expensive college was. So I thankfully, like when I was in high school, I was part of this program called ACES. It's called, this acronym stands for Achieving Collegiate and Academic Success. And basically that program was the one who helped me like navigate through the whole college process, as well as like a bunch of Googling and Redditing, stuff like that, just to like, try to navigate everything. And I ended up going to Montgomery College, which is a community college in Maryland first. Did my 2 years there and then transferred to a four-year institution. I transferred to Bowie State, which is a historically Black college in Maryland as well. And throughout that whole process, like of financial aid, just like trying to navigate how to fund school was just very like difficult and stressful, like especially because I mean I did qualify for like Pell grants and stuff like that, but it still wasn't enough to cover everything. So that's how my like interest and like love for scholarships came about, because literally it was like, okay, if I do this application and you know what I mean, do an interview and do an essay, I could potentially get money for school. Like I have the time to do that. You know what I mean? So it kind of like sprouted into this thing where it's like this, like learning how to actually successfully like get funding for school through scholarships and through just like trial and error basically. And me just like navigating through that whole process. And then when I was at Bowie State, I applied for this scholarship program called the Fannie Angel Scholars Program. So that program actually is a scholarship program that they offer to all the HBCUs, historically Black colleges within the state of Maryland. And if you get selected and graduate with a 3.5 GPA and get a 152 score on the LSAT, you get a free full tuition scholarship to University of Baltimore School of Law. So I actually was a recipient of that as well. So awesome. Yeah, I know. So it's been a lot of like, jumping through hoops kind of thing to get where I am now. I just applied for law school for this cycle and working full-time at an association in DC and doing scholarship based. So it's like, it's been a lot. It's been a bumpy ride, but I'm happy to be here,
So you're happily busy.
Yeah, basically.
Good to hear. Yeah, and it is interesting. There's a lot to touch on out of that as well. I think I've touched in bits and pieces about my background and previous sessions of this. I'm a Pell Grant recipient as well. And, a lot of that is, part of the underlying mission behind origin story too, and I think we have that shared mission. And what is interesting is you're actually the first person to reach out. Also congratulations on that, to out of interest, in what I'm doing too, and I appreciate that. And it's really great to see other people take interest in that mission. And I think that we'd also touched on this being a topic that doesn't maybe get talked about as much on a broad level, and maybe even that it gets compartmentalized as being, as many of these things do, as a DEI or diversity issue or something like that. And sure it is, but I think it's also this thing of, a greater basis in economic inequality. How do we tackle that as it relates to education? And, there's so many groups that fall under that umbrella that, something needs to be done with that. I personally remember too, just the whole process of applying. I thankfully, had my mom there with me to help me navigate FAFSA and applying for a Pell grant and things of that nature. And I guess, she's always been smart with, finding deals on things, beyond being a coupon cutter. So I think that there was a lot of boost there. But then also I think that, as you work through that process, that, there's a lot that's unwritten there. And it seems like you've been really successful in, getting support as you go through school, and even as an active student worker right now. You have a ton of stuff on your plate that you're juggling. How do you feel you worked to that level, and where have you found success personally with that?
I mean, I think that for me, it was a lot of trial and error and just trying different things. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because I feel like, especially when you are kind of navigating it, even though I think for me too, I did have the parental support the best that they can, and I think that that other people I think did try to support me, but it's still such an individual experience. You know what I mean? It's one thing when, you know what I mean, you're telling somebody, or you're asking someone to help you fill out FAFSA, or asking about what certain terms mean, but it's so different when you're actually just in the moment of actually doing that. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's very intimidating, I would say. And I think that for me, I had to learn that I'm not gonna be perfect at everything. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm not, there's no perfect way to fill out an application. There's no perfect way to write an essay. There's no perfect way to, answer a question. You know what I mean? I think that I had to really learn that just putting your best foot forward, and just as you're going through the process, learning what works for you and what your strengths are, and maximizing those strengths, I think has been beneficial to me. I think I know for me, one thing I learned about myself during that whole college process, and even early in career too, is I'm definitely a people person. You know what I mean? I'm really good at talking to people. So I was okay, well, I may not be the best person at crunching numbers when it comes to budgeting and stuff like that, but I know I'm good at talking to people. And I think that leveraging your strengths and understanding what parts of yourself and parts of your personality that you need to just focus on, or help strengthen. You know what I'm saying? I think that that's been really helpful for me. You know what I mean?
Definitely. And you are very personable, and I've found you to be that way in our conversations thus far too. As we're talking about terminology here, maybe you could define too in your own words what a Pell Grant is, and maybe what FAFSA represents.
So, okay, FAFSA.
I don't want that to be a zinger, but
I mean, I think that for me, okay, when I first heard about Pell Grants, how I understood it was it's just a bucket of money that states have to help people with low low income, or whatever, in certain brackets. They classify you, they give you how you qualify for a Pell Grant is based on your income bracket of your family. I mean, because most people when they're applying for college, they're what, 17, 18.
yeah.
So it's like basically your parents, mom, dad, if they're married, if they're not married, like their income and how, and basically it's like based on that, it's what you qualify for. Um, FAFSA, I mean, I think the idea of FAFSA is like to help everyone like obtain a college degree or obtain higher education, because I mean there is like loans and grants
Yeah,
and that type of thing. So I think the whole thing is like, okay, worst case scenario, you have to take out loans. Like that's the whole like that's your option type of thing. Like when it comes to like access to education, you know what I mean?
right.
So that's kind of how I understood it. But I think as I've like, I've graduated college a long time ago now. Well, since 2018,
Mhm.
and being like in the workforce, and I think doing a lot of work with scholarship aid. Like I think that it's just interesting how the the way even FAFSA is now compared to I think like when we were in school, like it's so different. Like application is shorter and
Right.
it's become I think well in my opinion it's become more user friendly. I think
Mm.
because I think that like I mean I've filled out FAFSA recently when I was applying for law school, and even though of course like law school there's no grants that qualify for that, but like I think the
Right.
application seemed more digestible, you know what I'm saying, than it did before. I don't know, maybe because I'm more knowledgeable now, but to me like it just seems a little bit more digestible and a little bit more easier to understand, I think, than before. But I think that has to do with like this whole like issue of like student loans and like, you know what I'm saying, people like, being like plummeted by the student loan debt. But then also it's like it's like a double-edged sword, because it's like, okay, well, you want to go to college, okay, maybe you don't qualify for a Pell Grant, or you're obtaining like a graduate degree and you don't call there's no Pell, there's no grants, you know what I'm saying? So it's
Right.
like, okay, well, we'll give you this loan, and it's like it's helping you, really, it's not really helping us. But then it's like a double-edged sword. It's like
Yeah.
the debt of this loan is like very trickling for a lot of people, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
oh,
And
it's a
and
hot
there's
mess.
just so much there to touch
Right.
on.
Yeah, it's a hot mess. I don't know. Like sometimes it's like it's crazy because it's like, okay, especially like if you come from like a low income background, or even like I would say immigrant background, it's like, okay, get an education, get a
Mhm.
job, you know what I'm saying, live the American dream type of thing. But it's like, okay, they don't tell you that like, to obtain that education, it's so much like you have to think about when it comes to finances, right? If you go to a in-state school, out-of-state school, private school, public school, it's
Right.
like so many things and layers of this that you don't realize when you're when like as a parent or as someone looking in, like, oh, just go to college, graduate. No, it's not as simple as that. It's so many things that you have to think about, especially like when students are younger, like 17, 18 years old, having all that pressure on them to think about all these things. And like
Mhm.
of course like these are kids that like barely got their license, they're like just now like coming into the world, like they're not thinking about all that. And then parents, I think a lot of them get like sticker shock, you know what I'm saying, because it's like,
Sure.
or just shock in general by like what like all the layers that go into the process, you know what I mean? Because even if you want to like let's say you do qualify for a Pell Grant and you want to get additional funding like from the institution, for example, like
Right.
they're really going through your parents' finances with like a fine-tooth comb, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And they're really like getting all up in your business. So I think a lot of people aren't prepared or like don't realize like how much really goes into it, you know what I mean, until you're actually going through it. You're like, wow, like if I knew this, maybe I would have done X, Y, and Z differently. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the process seems very intensive considering, each of those grants or scholarships that you apply for is like a relatively small amount of money towards the larger whole. So, you're
Right.
going through all of these processes just to piece together the money to actually afford to go to school. And, it just seems like par for the course in America at this point.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, it's funny because I was talking to my dad about this recently. Like, debt is like definitely an American concept. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like other countries, like there's no credit, there's no loans, there's no
right.
like real debt. You know what I mean? It's like if you buy a house or you buy a piece of land, like that's your land. Like you don't owe a bank, like you're paying everything like outright. There's no like loans. There's like this concept of debt is definitely like an American concept. So I think it's funny how like I talk to my cousins that are like in Guyana or Pakistan, you know what I mean? They're going to college, but it's like, but like of course, the cost for them to go to college is not the cost for me to go to college or for me to go to
Sure.
law school. You know what I'm saying? It's just, it's so different. But it's because the way they view education and the way they like look at things is just different than us. Like like, I think that like here in the US, like we kind of have a mentality where it's like, well, you need to sacrifice or you need to like, you know, suffer almost to obtain like this level of success, like type of thing. Like we were always benchmarking things, right? So it's like, okay, you have
Right.
to get a high school diploma, bare minimum, you need to do that. Then it's like, you have to get a bachelor's degree, benchmark there. Then now it's like another benchmark. It's like, okay, well, now you have to get a graduate degree. You know what I
Right.
mean? And it's like, okay, then you get that. And it's just like, you're already in the hole now, like all this money, you know what I mean? Let's say if you
Right.
didn't, like, you know what I mean? And then it's like, wow, now you need to buy a house and get a car and have a family and, you know, be a well-rounded individual.
Right. And maybe make the 40 under 40 club and
Yeah,
you know, do all that. By I feel like, you know, personally, I've seen this as some sort of unwritten law, you know, or unwritten rule of thumb, you know, that you need to achieve all those things by that age. You know, I haven't reached that age yet, but it's like, I think you got more time than you think. And I think that popular culture can really put a lot of these things over your head, especially if you're a younger person. And, you know, also for the audience, like anybody who might be listening that is a younger person, I wanted to hash out some of this terminology and give a really real perspective too on, you know, what the process is building to that. And I think, you know, it's way different when you are just coming into things, you know, getting into school and your actual reality versus expectation when you get out. And you know, I could think for a law degree that you definitely do have to have a lot of certifications, you know, just to meet the bar and
right,
things of that nature. But I think for some other degree fields, it's like, you know, you get out and you realize like, wow, like degrees are kind of dispersible when it comes to actual job descriptions that you're looking at. And there are some of them, which I personally disagree with this a lot.
right,
And this seems very antiquated, but they will put top tier school on the job description. And we're like, what does that term actually mean? Does that mean an Ivy League? You know,
right,
it's very
exactly.
nebulous, and it
Yeah,
almost seems like it's going to get a slap on the hand from regulators pretty soon, in the same way that they've been with stating salary bands and things of that nature.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. It's like, it's funny. Like, I think like I experience this a lot with, especially like applying for law school. There's like, especially I would say the law industry is like elitist when it comes to degrees, right? It's like if
Right.
you have a law degree versus like if you don't have a law degree, like the treatment is like so different. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I'm like, this has to be like a discrimination. It has to be.
Yeah.
'Cause it's like it's crazy, but I don't know. Like, I think that like I understand like where it's like if let's say like as a student, right? You're like, okay, I want to go to Harvard. Like my dream is to go to Harvard, or I want to go to Georgetown and study in these like amazing and beautiful libraries where presidents and so went. I get that, right?
Right.
But at the same time, though, it's like, okay, like if you think about what made like a lot of these like top schools, if you think about like Ivy League or like top 50 or whatever, top 25 schools, like what has made them considered to be these top schools, and a lot of it is rooted in racism. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
these like, you know, predominantly white institutions that like these like white males from like high income and high profile families have gone to. That's that is what has made these schools be viewed in this regard. You know what I
Right.
mean? So it's like if you really think about it, it's like, okay, like that's why even like schools like Georgetown and these like, you know, Ivy League, they don't even give a lot of money. You know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
it's like an honor for you to come here. You know what I mean? Like you're going to a school that like with this amazing alumni network, and they whatever they say to try to justify this like outlandish cost. You know what I mean?
Right. And it seems like a lot of that cost is lapped up when you have certain means. Like it just becomes, oh, if you're at a certain level of income as a family, and maybe you have some kind of generational wealth, you're like,
Right.
oh, that's a drop in the bucket. We've been saving for 2 or 3 generations for this.
Right. Exactly.
We've been here forever, whatnot. Like, yeah, some people are going to go to school that way. But it's also like, I think there's a lot to realize about, the origin of universities in the first place,
Right.
where like when they originated back in Europe, there was, all those things that you mentioned there, and those were, the only people that could go to school is like white privileged men.
Right.
Um, but then you also had this extra layer of, you needed to be in a certain caste even to go to the university, and anybody else didn't even get to go, even if they had the means. Like you had to be from a certain family to even get accepted. That was like the whole purpose behind them. And then I remember when you mentioned Harvard as well, and a lot of the Ivy League schools there. Yeah, there's schools you can get a degree there or whatnot, and no disrespect to anybody that's graduated from there. I'm sure there's a lot of people that have gone there that have gone on to do great things. One of them is a professor there by the name of Anthony Jack, and he writes about an unlikely subject. And this is a book recommendation I'm just going to throw out there right now. It's called The Privileged Poor. And I haven't heard of anybody else, that's really touched on this subject so hard within the Ivy Leagues.
Right.
But I think that he did it, based on his experience, going up, working his way through the ranks per se, coming from an African American family, and getting an acceptance, finally into that tier of society. And then also, one stat that he threw out was, he's like, even today, from what I see, for our admissions, a lot of the Black students that they actually admit to the university already have day school and boarding school in their background. So, I think sometimes it even goes beyond privilege and it gets into pedigree.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think that like when it comes to like, I think everybody, no matter who you are, where you come from, you want to do well in life. You know what I mean? Like everybody wants to do well, whatever that definition of well is. I think everybody wants to do well. Like everyone wants to feel like they've accomplished, you know what I mean? Something, whether it be becoming a doctor or having a family, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think everybody has like their own like vision of what success and what like happiness looks for them, right? And I think that like it's funny how like a lot of what higher education does is categorize people, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like, okay, you like demonstrate these qualities X, Y, and Z, you're in this category type of thing. And I think that it's interesting because it's like there's a lot of intersectionality there, you know what I mean? Like I think that just because you are, let's say, a student of color, I wouldn't say that doesn't mean that you're like, uh underprivileged, right? Like that's not synonymous, right? So it's like I think that it's interesting, like when he was talking about like what he was talking about, because it's like, okay, like you want to like put these like more labels on things that already have so many labels, you know what I mean? And it's like then it's like almost like you're like trying to label to divide, you know what I'm saying? Like I don't know, I feel like it comes a point where it's like, okay, I think that you have to look at it for like, it's not about like, okay, like the type of like Black students we admit. It's more so like, okay, like let's look at the school as a structure, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And look at it from that angle and not like specifically focused on like a small minority of students. Because if you think about it, like I'm pretty sure, I don't know the exact number, but I'm pretty sure if you pull up like the stats like of students at Harvard, like Black students are like not even with the majority. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
They're definitely minority. So it's like, I mean, to focus on like this small population, I mean, you really should be focusing on the school as a whole and like the
Right.
practices of the school as a whole and like the admissions department as a whole versus like this like small subset of the population that like,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it stands out, I guess, because it's like, oh my God, these Black students getting admitted or these like, you know, students getting admitted, but it's like, it's so much bigger than just that. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
Yeah, I agree. And I think that when you look at the overall problem, it's like, yeah, you need to grow your acceptance rate, you know, and it's remains harder to do that when you have the extremely exorbitant cost of going to the school in the first place. So, you know,
right.
there's just a lot of levels, I think, to that. Um, and then for the first generation students, you know, period, I think I experienced, you know, just I talked about the application process, but it's also this thing of kind of like learning culture and like adapting to that as well. And I think that it's maybe different too, like, you know, depending on what kind of background you come from. Like, do you feel like when you were first coming into, you know, going to like higher and higher levels of education,
Mhm.
that you felt like you needed to like change up a bit, like the way that you talked or the way that you presented yourself?
I mean, I think for me, like, because I was a transfer student, I think that presented its own challenges just because like I didn't start off in like a specific cohort, you know what I mean? Like I kind of came in, you know, as a transfer student and I came in during spring semester. So it's like I came in the
Right.
middle, you know what I'm saying, of the year where everybody is already kind of like in their group or like, you know what I'm saying, that type of thing. So I think for me, like my main thing, how my approach was always like I need to graduate, you know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like I worked and I went to school. So I think for me as a transfer student, I feel like I wasn't really that focused on like having that traditional college experience and being really involved like on campus and stuff like that. So I think for me, like I pretty much stayed like I would say to myself a lot just because like I was so focused on just like finishing, you know what I mean?
Right.
I had this like sense of urgency to finish and like work and like, you know, start my career. Like it was a sense of urgency that I had. But I do think that like the benefit I think for me being at a historically Black college, like everybody was pretty much like very inclusive and very friendly and very much like, you know what I'm saying, cognizant of like, you know, the you know the challenges that you know people of color may have, you know, in like the workplace and stuff like that. But
Right.
I do think that it did make me realize like I feel like I was almost spoiled in a way because it's like I was in college in this like very supportive environment. And then
Right.
I feel like when I graduated, it was like wow, like I feel like I'm just like by myself now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that I think that was a culture shock for me. Like I was like almost like not I wouldn't say coddled, but I definitely was like, you know, around a lot of people that I felt was very supportive towards me, like my professors, my
Hmm.
students that I was in class with. We were all like very supportive and very much like, you know what I mean? Like talk about like a lot of things that you deal with like in like the real world, right? But then when you
Right.
actually transition from like college to like, you know, for me, like my first job, like at a law firm, for example, it was so and I was like, oh my God. So I think like I didn't experience like the whole like changing or adapting of myself so much in college, but obviously I did feel like that in like my first job, for
Yeah.
example, working at a law firm, like it's like, okay, like, you know, I have to carry myself a certain way and like certain things you just don't understand about
Right.
like when it comes to like stuff that I have to worry about or think about, you know what I mean? Or like people asking just like questions about like my background, for example, without really like understanding that it could be offensive. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
I remember my first job out of college, somebody like asked me like, oh, like is that like what's your like where are you like really from? I was like, what?
Oh, that one.
Yeah. And then somebody else, like the same individual was like, oh, like, so what's your like real name? Like your real name. I was like, And it's like those sort of comments, like nobody really prepares you for that, because it's like you don't want to be known as that person that's like that angry, you know what I'm saying, like person of color type of trope, you know what I'm saying? You don't want to be known as that. But then it's like,
Sure.
what do you, like, how do you like respectfully, like it was hard for me to like the process of learning how to respectfully like check somebody. You know what I mean?
That is an art, and I think
Yeah,
it's
it
something
is.
that I've definitely had to work with too over the years, and it's something professionally like there's that one book. It's like I forget the name of it, but I think it's like what they don't teach you in college, or something
Yeah.
of that nature. And yeah, sometimes you're going to have to do that. I think it's a reality, and you know, there's also like when you're in professional situations, like the managing up and managing down thing, all the lingo that you have to learn,
Yeah.
um, how to navigate, also like being uncomfortable, being in a room with people that are from a very different background than you. And there is a thing with that of acceptance, but I think there's also like the story of when you feel like the outsider. It doesn't even matter, if you uh, are literally like defined as an outsider.
Right.
If you feel like one, that's enough. And
Right.
you're coming into a room and you're just like, I don't really know, how to dive into this. And I think it's very much that way for somebody that's coming right out of school, and especially in an environment like New York too. I know that you've known a bit of the ropes that way. I'm personally a transplant, and I think there's a lot to learn about mannerisms, everything else, and there's just there's circles in New York. It's just like it's that kind of stuff that is not going to get covered in college too. And
Right.
it's like when you first like hit the professional world in New York, like it seems like there's so much networking to do, and there's also like this social intelligence thing of like knowing who to work with, who to not work with, and like kind of cut corners that way. So maybe a good segue for that question too would be, as you've made your way in the professional world, what has networking been like for you, and how would you underline the importance of that, and maybe tying it back towards scholarships and like gaining professional recognition?
Okay.
It's a loaded one.
I know. I mean, I think that like, so I work in the DC area, and I would say similarly with DC, like, I mean, I'm from like the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, but
Right.
my first time working in DC was after college. Like DC is like being the nation's capital, and this like, place where everybody wants to work. Like we like even like my job that I work at currently, like I could count on one hand how many people are actually based out of the DC, like are actually from the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. Like everyone else is from somewhere else. Like I have colleagues from Oklahoma, Idaho, like they're from everywhere. You know what I mean? Because I think that like there's like a thing with like same thing like New York, where you have to do a lot of like networking, and like it's like such a political, even if you're working in a job that's not political, it's like this like political undertone with everything. You know what
Oh
I mean?
yeah.
So especially like recently with everything going on too, like I think everything is like so hyper politicized too. So I think that for me, like when I first started working in DC, like but this is when I first started this job, it was like in 2019, like early 2019, before the pandemic. So I was like taking the train to work, and like,
Mhm.
doing a lot of the DC type of things you do when you work in DC. Take the train, go to the happy hours, you know what I'm saying? Like just like talk to the different people in the building. Like you'll be in the elevator, and then you'll just talk with somebody in the elevator, like that type of thing. And like in doing that, I think I've realized like DC is a very much like not what you know, but who you know what I mean?
Sure.
And like the first thing anyone asks you in DC, I'm pretty sure in New York it's the same. It's like, oh, what do you do? You know what I mean? Who do you
Right.
work for? Like that's like the leading question, because it's like there's like a lot of preconceived notions if you tell somebody you work for, like for example, like a government agency or
Right.
association or a nonprofit. Like there's so many like different like, stereotypes or like
Yeah.
judgments that come with it, and it's so intimidating. I think like when you're not familiar with that world and coming into it and realizing like, oh my god, like maybe I shouldn't have said that, or maybe
Yeah.
did I offend somebody by saying that, you know what I mean? Like I think it's like it's a lot to like digest when you don't when you haven't been exposed to that world. But I think that
Sure.
for me, like part of my success when it came to getting scholarships was the whole networking aspect, right? So it's like building a relationship with the scholarship foundation or with the donor, you know what I'm saying, and like keeping them updated and invested like in my progress or in my educational journey. And I think that because I had experience with that, even though it's not necessarily like the same thing when it comes to like work, but I think
Right.
it is a trend. It was like transferable skill in that like once I understood, you know what I mean, the way like people in DC kind of like operate when it came to like what do you do, who do you work for type of thing. I think it was easier for me to kind of like, you know, navigate through that world and really understand that like, you know what, like even though some of these people like you do run across I think some crazy people wherever you go,
Oh yeah.
especially places like DC and New York, like a lot of narcissists, type of thing, which is
Right.
which makes sense. I mean, for places like DC, New York, LA, whatever you want to call it. But I think that like for me, like understanding that like everybody is just trying to like build a community. Everybody wants that sense of community. And I think that like people, that's why I think people gravitate towards people who have similar interests and like maybe want to do similar things as them, just because they want this like sense of like community, sense of support, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And also like because once you have that like almost like your tribe, for example, it's like you feel like it's easier to obtain your goal because it's not just you working towards it. It's like you have this like community, this like support system with you, you know what I'm saying? And
Right.
also like when it comes to like networking, I think for me too, like it's changed a lot pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic.
Yeah. That's a zinger. So for that, like how do you feel like networking has changed and the work world has changed with remote work during pandemic and maybe some of the other changes during the pandemic?
Well, I think that I mean everything has changed. I mean, we used to be, I know like for example, like where I work currently, we were in the office like 5 days a week, you know what I mean? I mean, people worked from home, but like it wasn't like you would work from home 1 day a week. Like it wasn't like, fully remote office, you know what I mean?
Right.
And like people would take the train and that was like a normal thing, and now especially like in the DC area, and I mean I feel like everywhere in the United States at this point, like this like the working 5 days a week in the office is just like not gonna happen.
Right.
Like it's just like it's either you work hybrid or you work remote. Like
Yeah.
there's no like this expectation of people coming in 5 days a week, it's like for 40 hours, like this doesn't exist anymore, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I think when it comes to networking, I know like I mean before, like I think especially in the DC area too, like happy hour was like a thing, like you would go to the happy hours, that's how you meet people, and like certain people from certain like companies or organizations go to certain places for happy hours and stuff like that. That was like a thing. And now I think in the pandemic, like I think for me, like I've definitely utilized LinkedIn more, you know what I mean? Like just like reaching out to people on LinkedIn and kind of like in engaging with people on their LinkedIn posts and stuff like that. I think that that's been helpful for me just because like it's still like even though LinkedIn is like for careers, like it's social media. So it's like
Yeah.
it's a way of like networking, but not like making it like seem like, oh my God, I want something from you type of thing. Like
Right.
I think it's a very like nice segue if you like know how to like actually like, you know what I mean, interact with people type of thing. But
Yeah.
I also think that like now too, like with stuff being virtual, I've seen a lot of places do like virtual meetups, virtual happy hours, virtual conference, like so many virtual things now. And I think it's good too, but I think that it's a skill definitely to learn to network in virtually versus like in person too. I think for me,
Right.
I would say I'm a very social person, but for me, like doing stuff virtually was very hard for me. Like it was definitely a learning curve. Just because I'm so used to like, shaking somebody's hand, for example, like certain
Sure.
things like that. And like you just can't do that no more, and I think that,
Oh, it's the fist bump.
yeah, or like elbow bump or something. So it's like, so it was like really difficult. And I think for me, like being somebody so social, like this whole virtual world was like stressful. It was really stressful for me because I'm just like, oh my
Right.
God, we're gonna go back to normal. But I think that, like, I mean, the pandemic has been around for like what, 2 years now. So I think that most people are used to it. But I think that it is like, as you do it more, it becomes more normal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes
So,
sense. And I had used this program called Lunch Club.
oh yeah.
Yeah, and that's been really useful during all this for networking. And it's kind of like this is kind of an awful comparison, but there's this program in the past called Chat Roulette, uh,
Mhm.
where it would just pick random people for you to talk to, and
Oh
it
my God.
works a similar way. Is that it sets you up on a lunch date with somebody professionally based on your interests, and you just randomly match with that person, and then you're on a video chat with each other, and you get to know each other. And I think it's a little bit more involved in something like Clubhouse. You get to actually see each other. It's professionally focused, so that I think could be a good resource as well. So we got about I don't know 8-10 minutes remaining here.
Mhm.
I'd like to leave the rest of the time to talk a little bit more about Scholarship Bay and like where you're at with it right now, what services you offer, where you want to take it, et cetera.
So currently, like, basically what we're doing is a lot of like student coaching. So basically, what we do is we offer different services that have to do with obtaining scholarships. Like, for example, like essay review or editing, resume review or editing, one-on-one consultations or just coaching sessions, like for any questions you may have, like scholarship package review, scholarship interview prep, that type of thing. And currently, I'm working on a scholarship ebook coming
Cool.
soon, where
We'll
it
look
kind
out
of,
for it.
yes. So it'll basically like outline like how to, apply for a scholarship from start to finish, like all the follow-up you would do after you apply, some like tips and tricks that worked for me type of thing. And I think it'll be helpful too, just because like I know a lot of the students that I'm specifically trying to target don't have necessarily that much disposable income. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So like I'm trying to make it where it's like this ebook be like a cohesive resource that touches kind of on everything. And then if somebody does want to, like, what I'm saying, find out more information or have a question on a specific thing, they could like, book a session or that type of thing. I'm also working on a lot of collaborations with different schools in the area.
Oh,
So I'm
cool.
currently in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. So, like, for example, my alma mater, Bowie State, like doing some work with them to provide some scholarship workshops, stuff like that. So, yeah, I'm like slowly but surely working on like a lot of different things. It's just that like it's a lot when you're juggling like, full-time job and trying to like do this at the same time. But
Absolutely.
yeah, and also we're on Instagram at the Scholarship Bay, and working on the website will be up hopefully in the next on May 1st, hopefully if all goes well, theScholarshipBay.com. So yeah, just have a lot of things in the pipeline.
Cool. And that Instagram is the scholarship BAE, all
Yes,
one word, right?
yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure everybody gets to the right place. Um, cool. Well, that is really good overview of everything you're offering right now too. And I think another thing came to mind as you're saying that as well.
Mhm.
So when it comes to actual scholarship submissions, what are like the most common pain points that you've seen students encounter? And that can be, just like technical things within the application process, financial things, anything like that.
Well, I think a lot of students, they don't submit everything that they need. Like
Big one.
sometimes it's like the requirement will be like an essay, like an essay prompt, 2 letters of recommendation, transcript, and then it'll be like an optional thing. But I'm like, no, you should still submit it. Like even though it's optional, like you should still submit like if it's an additional like addendum or something like that, you should still submit. Or like sometimes people don't like they don't pay attention to the deadline or they request things late. So I think a lot of like sometimes what it has to do is like with organizational skills of the student too. But I think that has to do with like their experience level when it comes to applying and like getting used to like that type of process. Another pain point I would say is like not answering the question fully on the essay. Like
Right.
like I tell students all the time, I'm like, look, like these foundations or these donors are reading like hundreds and hundreds of essays, right? So it's like you want to make sure that like you're conveying things about yourself accurately and and concisely, not like don't need a lot of fluff. Like I think a lot of people like want to add in a lot of fluff that they don't need, you know what I mean? Or
Right.
like have a story that's like unique. I'm like, okay, like, you know, like for example, like the whole like, oh my God, I'm a low income type of thing. Like, yes, that's important. I'm not saying it's not, but like there's a way to like, you know, paint your picture without having it get lost in translation because like
Sure.
they read like a million stories like that. You know what I mean? So I would say that too. And then one other one that I think people like students run into as well is like just like finding scholarships, you know,
Yeah.
like just finding like legitimate scholarships because there's so many like scams and stuff out there nowadays. And I always tell people, I'm like, you know, like, of course, like utilizing your school's financial aid, for example, to see what they have posted there, but also like, you know what I mean, reaching out to like looking at organizations that like you have like that relate to what you want to like if you're like a woman in engineering, for example, like
Right.
look at different like nonprofits or foundations, you know what I mean, cater to that and see if they offer scholarships because a lot of times they do. It's just that like it's not necessarily readily advertised as like some other ones are. So yeah, I think that those are like the three that I see the most of.
Awesome. And one other one came to mind here too. And we talked about this on a previous session, I think which was what led you to talking to me,
Yeah.
where I spoke with Jesse Mesa about some similar subjects. And I had actually, you know, background here, I was a mentor for him on an industry organization. And when he was submitting for scholarships to go to grad school,
Mhm.
I wrote a letter recommendation for him. And I think like that has helped a lot, you know, to have that and have something templated. And I'm just like, hey, you know, use it for whatever scholarship you're actually applying to. Because I think, you know, it reads like a resume. You're going to get the same
Right.
story generally either way. And do you feel like that's important too?
Oh my God, if more people did that, that would be so great. I mean, what happens for most students, and I don't know about, I can't speak for everyone. I know, but in my experience, like, and you have like 2 types of recommenders, right? One who's like, oh, like I'll write everything, don't worry, like I'll send it to you before I submit it type of person. Or you have the person who I think most people run into where it's like, oh, can you write it and then I'll edit it type of person. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Oh my God, if you could like if people could just do like a template, oh, that'd be so much easier for people. Like I wish somebody would do that for me, you know.
Right.
But I think that also like for on the student end of it, like picking the right recommenders, you know what I mean? Like just
Yeah.
because somebody has like a certain title or a certain affiliation doesn't mean they're gonna write you a good recommendation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've even heard of stories where people like really like they get like these like people with like prestigious titles and you know accolades to write a letter of recommendation and they don't even write a good one for them. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like very basic. It's go, he was in my class one semester, he got an A, or you know, it's like very like it's not like anything of real substance, like actually like make somebody want to be like, oh my God, wow, this person really talks highly about this person. You know what I mean? So I think that
Yeah.
yeah, it's important.
Yeah. So I'm reading that as don't pick sponsors within the periphery. Pick people that you know well and really know the nature of your work.
Yeah, and actually like you.
That's a big one too.
Yeah, because trust me, some people like, just because you got an A in their class doesn't mean they like you, or just
Right.
because.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've both been blessed to have, mentors and teachers along the way that, really helpful to get us where we needed to go. So this is probably a pretty good place to close it out. I wanted to thank you, Michelle Zaman, from the Scholarship Bay, BAE, for being on today. And again, the website for Origin Story is originstoryseries.com.